Ever wonder what makes the greats great? What makes the successful successful? What makes the brilliant brilliant? Our Tuesday meetups with the celebrities of pharma industry and science are your one-stop shop to all these answers and more. Join us for Pies of Life, an initiative of the Biopatrika Industry Mentorship Program, where we bring your dream mentors to you.
All right. So, first of all, thank you, Meena, for coming at short notice. I know you have a very busy schedule. Thank you very much for coming and talking to us. So, please, you can introduce yourself, talk about whatever you want, ask the students questions, and then they'll ask you questions.
Okay, thanks for inviting me. It's my pleasure to be here. And I do enjoy these interactions, with folks who are up and coming in the sciences and always interested in understanding where your mind is at and what challenges you're facing. So with that introduction, as Naren said, Meena Subramanyam. Naren, I've known Naren for a very, very long time. And I have to thank AAPS for, helping us build these professional relationships that has lasted for a very long time. And apart from our connection in science, we also have a deep connection through music. An artist. I'm a Bharatanatyam artist, and I know that Naren, is a multi-talented musician. So it's always been a pleasure for us to chat a little bit about our alter lives that we lead outside of science. So I'll briefly tell you about my career journey. So I'd rather you ask me questions and I respond rather than my monologue. But like many of you, I completed my PhD in this country, and then I took up a postdoctoral fellowship at Tufts Medical School. And really, the postdoctoral fellowship was an amazing experience for me because I got my PhD in microbiology and immunology, but I specialized a lot in immunology, and I worked for a really outstanding PI in my postdoctoral days, and I learned a lot from her. And interestingly, looking at her, I was inspired to remain in academia, even though I appreciated the trials and tribulations of applying for grants and the challenges she was having, despite being a brilliant researcher. And, her lab was so productive, so many publications, it didn't matter, right? It was very apparent to me that the network that you have, and I'm bringing it up in that context, it matters so much that even when you submit your grants, it always goes to that same clique of individuals who are the experts in that space. And the more you know and the more you interact with them and the more you openly share, there's a lot of scooping that happens. There've been, I have witnessed arguments between these senior academic researchers about one lab scooping another and getting their publication out, but nevertheless you need that partnership, because that's what really at the end of the day gets you the grants, because it elevates your role and position in their eyes as somebody who's competitive. So short story there, nevertheless. But when I was, in my third year of my postdoctoral fellowship, in fact, I got a call from a biotech company. I should say it was a pharma, but trying to establish their laboratories in the US. And I didn't know anything about drug development at that time. I was aware, what happens, but I really didn't know the process. And what they were looking for was an immunologist and a cell biologist to establish an immunology laboratory and actually do research work. So for me, in my life, I've always liked challenges of building things. I wanted to create something. I never liked inheriting stuff because I was so critical about things that people had put together. And I'm like, I would have never done it this way. So I told myself, instead of being a backseat driver, just take on that front seat role and build something so that you can make it what you like it to be. And so it was a very opportunistic move for me. And so I moved into industry, which I never thought I would do because I really didn't know what to expect. And honest to God, when I was a postdoctoral fellow, certainly in this area, there was no exposure to an organization like AAPS. I used to attend conferences, but I wasn't aware of any sorts of student development activities because that's not what my PI talked about, nor any of the fellow postdoctoral fellows. Nobody was doing all those things. They were so, focused on their research and they were, looking to get the jobs. No one was trying to network to figure out, are there ways and means in which we can learn about what's available there, except headhunters. They were always there. So, it was a headhunter who called me. So that was my first job, and it was actually in the organization which has become Merck Serono now. It used to be called Serono Laboratories, and I worked for the research division, which was Aeris Advanced Technology. And I went in there, and I had a fantastic run for 5 years. I built an immunology group for them, and I was doing target validation. So their business model was they would in-license all the discoveries from two big academic universities, Weizmann. So a lot of their discoveries or their products actually was in-sourced from the Weizmann. And the other one was they had some collaborations with universities in Paris. So interestingly enough, for people who are in the oncology space, I was one of the original persons who worked on LAG3. So lymphocyte activation gene 3 is now such a hot topic, but the person who discovered LAG3 was actually a collaborator of Serono. And I got to go to his laboratory and check out things. And the biology was so confusing at the time. We were trying to sort out if the labs was making a mistake in how they were characterizing the role of LAG3. There appeared to be way too many ligands. So I have a paper in that space from long time ago. Anyway, it's just a side story. So you never know. I was just thinking, checkpoint inhibitors was not a terminology that was coined then. We were talking about T suppressor cells, which now have evolved to T regulatory cells, right? Nevertheless, so I had a good 5 years run there, and it was a growth opportunity, and it is a fantastic culture. So the company was so interested in establishing a US presence. They were pretty generous in how much they were willing to spend to build up the groups, and I had a great team working with me. But what became apparent to me is I was still living in the mouse world. My goal here to coming into the industry was to learn about making medicines, but I was still validating everything in ex vivo systems or in animal systems. So the manager who hired me at Serono moved to Biogen. And of course, we had such a great rapport. Once he landed there, he's like recruited me there. And my motivation, actually, I was already an associate director at Serono, but I actually moved to Biogen at a lower level, and went back to working at the bench. So from being a manager, even though I did a lot of work at the bench, even in an AD level, but I did take a step down, and I'm deliberately telling this to this audience because many people think about career changes only to advance their title or to get better pay. Nobody ever thinks about enriching experiences. But for me, it was a very different perspective. I was early enough in my career, I couldn't care less about titles. I didn't care much about salary, but what I wanted was what are those experiences that I can, get at this stage such that eventually I'll be able to move into a role that is, something of my choosing that I can really tailor to my strengths. So and really learning drug development was something, and also I wanted to get closer to the clinical space and not be pigeonholed into the preclinical space, which there were a lot of challenges. And one of the frustrations is, of course, we used to get all these discoveries from many universities, but none of them panned out to be anything. So I would prepare these huge presentations to the board, to the CEO for them to invest in these, and they were never impressed. There wasn't enough data to convince them to invest. So we started actually a couple of programs with LAG3. In fact, we had a fusion protein, LAG3IG, in rheumatoid arthritis and in another autoimmune disorder, but we canned those studies pretty quickly when they realized that it's going to be a long road since we didn't understand the MOA at that time. We knew it bound to class 2, but beyond that, we knew there were other ligands which were not characterized. So anyway, so that's my journey from Serono to Biogen. And of course, I stayed at Biogen for 19 years. So my career journey is actually rather short, so it's not like people who have moved many times, but I think my experiences have been outstanding in terms of the opportunities I was able to, get in my role at Biogen. So I started off, as I said, as a bench scientist, but then I was moved into the management track very quickly, and I became the director of the group that I joined, I think, in less than 3 years from a senior scientist. But then I also got the chance to build the group. So that was the time when genomics and proteomics was exploding, and Millennium, which was located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was leading the way. So we also wanted to be the copycats doing a lot more genomics and proteomics. So I built all those capabilities in my group. So the group that I ended up leading was translational sciences and technology. which essentially was an organization that sat between discovery scientists and the clinical scientists in the preclinical space, but we interfaced with both. And we had multiple responsibilities. So we would develop cell-based methods for product characterization. We would develop cell-based assays that was given then to the CMC team for product release. We would develop a lot of biomarker assays. We would do actually fundamental research in trying to understand what the pharmacology supports in terms of biomarkers. We also did the PK assays, immunogenicity, so you name it. And, all the technologies that goes with it. And we supported all the therapeutic areas. Biogen was not only into neurology, we had a very strong immunology portfolio. We were also, through the acquisition of IDEC, we also had products in oncology. And then later acquisitions brought in hemophilia products. And then a collaboration with Ionis brought in the inhibitory RNA therapies. So pretty much, until I left, so as I said, I was there for 19 years. So the last program I touched was aducanumab, or Aduhelm as it's called. But then I had reached a point, right? The next step up for me would have been to get a role as a head of R&D or head of a therapeutic area. But it was obvious that there were a lot of people in contention, and I would not be able to go into the role that I wanted. And so I decided to branch out. So I mentioned to you my first move from Tufts to my first job was a very opportunistic move because somebody contacted me about the role. I didn't really actively seek it. But my move out of Biogen was very deliberate. I thought about what is it that I want to do? Now that I'm such a deep functional expert in translational sciences, what is the other experience that I'm looking for? So this is where what I decided was to capitalize on the experiences that I had outside of my functional line, which is I was a member of a number of program teams. I had the opportunity to be a program executive for 2 early stage programs. So the way they did talent development at Biogen is if they find somebody, is cutting, in terms of their assessment is on the top of their talent pool, then they give you additional opportunities. So one of this that was given to me was to lead a program, an early stage program, develop the strategy around why you would take this into a particular clinical indication, what the unmet need is, and all of that. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. You think about that big picture, how this product fits into a company's pipeline, how does it fit into a disease pipeline, what the competitors are doing, so on and so forth. So that was one experience that I really enjoyed. The other thing that I had the benefit of learning was being in that interface group between discovery and clinical development. I worked on a lot of projects, like how do you demonstrate comparability between product batches? How do you think about early clinical development, rapid movement into the clinic? How do you think about applying biomarkers? How do you think about risk stratification? So there are so many different things. So I felt that I had a lot of, strategic components that I could bring to bear in developing strategies for taking programs, forward from discovery through preclinical, into the clinical space, and finally into commercialization. So deliberately, I chose the global program leader role, and I particularly like the role at Takeda because you are pretty much the CEO of the asset. You have final accountability for all the decisions. Even though you report into an R&D committee, you have full budget control. You're accountable to the therapeutic area head and the R&D chief, but then you drive the program forward. And not just driving it through clinical development, but with a lens on commercialization. As most of you appreciate, these days getting regulatory approval is only step one. Unless you can get reimbursement and enable access of the medicines to patients, you really don't have a drug. So the accountability for me is, goes all the way from taking it in through from an IND phase all the way into launch and commercialization. So I partner with the brand lead to doing that. So that's where I am. I've done it for the last 4 years. Initially, I joined in the gastroenterology group, and then I was recruited to work in oncology. So right now I'm in oncology. I am the global program leader for brigatinib, which is a medicine ALK inhibitor in lung cancer. And I also oversee 2 programs in, these are T-cell engager programs that are going into multiple indications. So that's a quick overview, and then I'll stop here and take questions and whatever else you want to hear.
Yeah, I think we should go in a Q&A, but Meena, I do want to ask you to talk to you, but a little later about your life outside of work, because I think that the balance between that is very critical to understand. But let's do a few questions at this time. So please unmute and go ahead.
Hello, Dr. Meena and Dr. Naren. I am Sharvari Kshirsagar, and I'm a first-year graduate student at Mercer University in Atlanta, Georgia. It was really nice hearing about your journey. It was extremely inspiring. So you told us, my question to you is that you told us about your transition from from one field into a new field which you were not that expert in, but you still wanted to pursue it. It was out of your comfort zone. So what was the major challenge that you faced while maybe changing a field, or not exactly a field, but from one expertise to another? Was there any skill set which you felt that you needed more, or was there any challenge that you faced?
Absolutely. First of all, it's a very relevant question, right? Because most people are reticent to change fields or even take on a challenging role because they think that they may not have all the competencies, right? So the first thing is, in my example, primarily when I was at Biogen, most of the programs that we worked on were, inflammatory disorders. So it was either inflammation of the nervous system, so it's a neuroinflammatory products, or it was autoimmune disorders. So everything was immunology based. So when I started my role at Takeda in gastroenterology, it wasn't an immune-based disease that I, was working on. Really, it was all dependent on neurotransmitters. So there was a whole bunch of stuff that I had to learn. And in my role, that is the science of those gastric disorders. And beyond that, as a global program leader, you're going now head to head against the global clinical lead, against the regulatory leads. So you have to have some substance and depth of knowledge to be able to partner with them and come together with a cogent strategy and also challenge assumptions, right? Because my job is to really ensure that the drug can be moved rapidly through development into commercialization. So if there are individuals who lack experience and they're trying to dot the I's and cross the T's extensively, then you cannot really complete that. So you are right in that you may not always move into roles where you know everything, but what you need to be confident about is you know where to find the resources and spend the time learning. So those are the strengths that you need to carry with you. After all, we are always trained to learn. Even in academia, even if you're in that same role, you have to keep refreshing your knowledge. I mean, science is advancing at such a pace, nobody can ever say, I'm done learning, right? All of us continue to learn. It's a question of what are we learning. So,
Thank you. That was really a well put answer. The last part was really good, that you have to keep learning. Even when you are like 10 or 20 years into the field, you'll always keep learning. Thank you so much.
Surely. Good luck.
Hi, Hi, Meena. Thank you so
Hi.
much for sharing your experiences. So I think the note that I took down is that your career has been driven by the experiences that you're seeking. And I actually want to ask you about at the point where you took a step down. You took it because you said that even though the title, and which is a factor that a lot of people take into consideration when they're moving into jobs, that I don't want to lose the title that I had previously, and it might not look good on my resume, but you took it because you found that it was a job that sort of gave an experience that you wanted to earn, right? So after you took that step down, was there any priority on growth? Did you try to prove yourself to get back to the position that you were?
So I did not consciously try, but if you're confident in the skills that you bring to the table, and that was primarily the reason why I didn't mind that I had to take a step down in the title, because I knew what I was capable of. So within 3 years, as I said, I was made the director of the group, and the person who hired me, he actually said, that's the best thing I've ever done, and he took on a job outside the company. He said, this company doesn't need me anymore because they have you. So he was such a gracious leader, I have to say. Not everybody is lucky enough to have a manager and a sponsor who behaves in that manner. So I have to say it was actually pretty annoying to go back to the bench, and I had to even relearn how to do trap and blue counting under the microscope. Those gazillion SOPs. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And actually, there were so many errors in those SOPs that they had that I had to kind of reestablish and correct some of those assumptions. Because once again, those were outdated and they had not updated it to current procedures. So there were some interesting experiences, right? Where you feel like you're already so much more senior and why am I having to do? But then I began to appreciate these processes that, it is to standardize because everybody can come into this with their own training and people can apply their knowledge in very different ways. But if you have to have reliable data coming out, then everybody has to at least approach it similarly. It's not to stifle innovation, but it's to really ensure that the final product, everybody understands what is the input into that. So there were many trying days. I have to be very honest. I was asking myself, this is really worth it? Because I did want to learn drug development, but I really didn't do a job search, right? I just jumped at the offer that came my way, and I just went because I liked the manager. I mean, I worked for him for 4 years, and so I said, why not? So, but you just have to look at it that way. You have to be confident in what you bring to the table. You have to be willing to put in the sweat equity to learn the new job and what the expectations are, and then I think things work out.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. So you mentioned about your, your supervisor, like the director or the person who basically hired you to be a great leader. And, different people have different definitions for leader. So what should I look for in a great leader? Like, how do you see, or what do you see in a great leader?
Okay, so, this is like how you perceive beauty, right? Everybody has their own interpretation. And since you said, what is my perspective on a leader? For me, I want somebody who inspires me, right? So for me, inspiration is something that's very important. And a leader has to carry their, vision for where they're trying to take their group. That's the first thing. The second thing is they need to be a good listener. If they're, so much into themselves that they cannot hear what others are saying, what ideas exist out there, then I don't really consider them a leader. The third thing is they have to be bold to make decisions, like willing to take risks. Because nothing in drug development is sure. I mean, science itself is not definite, right? You're trying to hypothesize things and then you're disproving it mostly. That's the null hypothesis. And then if you're able to prove it, then you have a winner, right? But 90% of the time, we're trying to, disprove that it's true. So somebody who's willing to make decisions and willing to take, make those decisions in a situation where they don't have all the data. For me, that shows me that they have the breadth of experience and the ability to synthesize, stuff that they're seeing. That knowledge, the ability to synthesize is very, very important. And then the fourth thing is a person who doesn't take himself or herself too seriously. Is able to go with the flow and appreciates, everything around them. I think that makes it, that personality trait makes them more empathetic to their employees, to their direct reports, and be much more considerate about how to run their business. So 4 or 5 traits that I think are important.
That is so great because mostly all of the things you mentioned, I do see in people that are in leadership positions, but not everybody's a good listener. And I feel like that's very important. So thank you for pointing that out.
And I just say this, not to say that we are being discriminated against or not, but many of us, with the focus these days is on diversity and inclusivity. And so to be counted, you have to speak up. And if you particularly are in the company of individuals who have a challenge in listening, it's even more important for you to feel confident to step up and have your voice heard, right? Otherwise, you'll just get lost in the mix. So.
Hi, Dr. Meena. Thank you for your wonderful answers, and your journey is truly inspiring. What I had a question is, you mentioned that you you like to build things and rather than inheriting things from someone because you like things done your way. So in a way, you are a perfectionist. So how do you deal with, if when you are a perfectionist, there are people around you who may not be exactly like that. So how do you deal with conflict or issues that come around with it? And as you are a leader, how do you deal with conflict?
Right. So after many, many years of training, I have to say, and also with a lot of gray hair, you mellowed over the years, right? Most people mellow over the years. But conflict resolution is something that's very critical for a leader. Conflict resolution is not to say that you lose your values or your principles or you lower the bar in terms of, of how things should be done. So the first thing is having strength in communication. I didn't mention this for a leader because even, Farzana was asking me the qualities for a leader. Communication is very important. And for me, it's implicit when you say somebody is a leader, they need to be able to state what they have in their mind. So when it comes to people on the team or when it comes to individuals in the group, being explicit about expectations is very important. You have to, really articulate what your expectations are to those individuals and how you envision something to go, right? And if things are not done to those standards, then you feel like despite having requested things be done to that level, if somebody has not done it, you're in a position of strength to say, why not? Why did it not go this way? But you also have to have the common sense to hear them out to say, what were the constraints? What were the reasons for not being able to execute it? If it is due to slack, a person being slack or just doesn't understand how to do it, then the first time around you can offer some help. You can say, do you want to consult with a subject matter expert to execute it? But when it becomes a repeat occurrence, then what you need to ask is whether this person is in the wrong role. Is it a wrong fit? Do they have other strengths that you need to position them differently than putting them in this particular role? The final option is to really have a conversation with them to say, listen, this is not a good fit for you, move on. So that's how I approach conflict. I certainly do not approach it with a yelling match because it doesn't get anybody anywhere, right? Actually, it only takes you back several steps in terms of relationship building, and you just lose trust of your team members. So this is something you finesse this art over time. You just don't, initially most of us start off being very impatient. For type A personalities, impatience is the other side of the coin because you feel like if I done it, I could just do all of this. Why do I have to rely on these individuals? But then you learn as a leader, you have to delegate and you have to trust people to deliver. And you can coach them. You don't have to micromanage them, but you can coach them or provide them the resources, right? And despite that, if things don't go the way, then you have to have the gumption to challenge them. You shouldn't be afraid to challenge. You cannot say, oh my God, I don't want to make them feel bad. I don't want to have a conflict with them. I want everybody to be happy. That is not the right state. Everybody being happy is not a good state to be, actually. People need to feel on the edge, right? They have to feel like they have a commitment to deliver. It cannot be, I'm so comfortable in my role. Then you need to move on, right? So at least that's my perspective.
That was a perfectly articulated answer. Thank you so much. Nicely constructed. Step 1, step 2, step 3. So thank you so much for the insight. Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Meena. I'm Amrita Dandekar and I'm a second year PhD student at Mercer University. My lab actually works on topical transdermal delivery systems. So my work is around that area, basically doing in vitro permeation testing. Thank you for sharing all your insights and all the switches in the career that you had. And that was, I think, by choice. I had a quick question that what do you think about the new people who are graduating fresh and joining industry? Specifically, what do you think they lack as compared to what it should be, or what is the general trend that you see nowadays?
Actually, I think the students who are coming out of schools these days are much more prepared to enter the industry than any of us ever were. Because in my time, as I said, there was no exposure to what working with the industry looked like. We didn't have any partnerships with folks from the industry. Most of us, at least my lab was so fully funded by the NIH and from other grants. It wasn't an industry-based grant for me to even work with a partner across. So the folks whom I see these days definitely are much better prepared. And also they have a good concept about working in teams, right? When I was a postdoctoral fellow, we pretty much were all, or even a PhD student, because intense competition in the lab, right? For resources, for ideas, for securing space in the, animal facility to do your experiments, and then who gets out first, right? So it wasn't the same idea of, multiple people getting on the paper because you did one aspect of one project and somebody else pitched in for another. So you didn't have these core facilities. So I'm dating myself. We didn't have core facilities. We had to do everything ourselves, at least at the university I went to. There may have been others which had all of these. And so what I find in students these days is not only do they understand that good science gets done, we actually, in academia then, we thumbed our noses up and said, who will work in industry? They don't do good science, but that's not the case, right? These days, everybody appreciates that actually there's cutting edge science happening in industry. Students coming in are much better prepared to work in teams. So those are the good aspects. The bad aspects is, I think students coming in suffer from what I refer to as instant gratification. So everybody comes in thinking that I can be an entry-level person only for 1 year. I should be just moving up the ranks like, like a comet streaking up. So unreal expectations, right? So first of all, they have so much to learn, but then they think that because they're an expert in one technique or technology, that we have to somehow promote them every year. So what I find is, and particularly being in the Northeast, it's really challenging to retain talent because people are able to migrate from company to company on an annual basis, and they get bump up in salary and title because the smaller the company, the bigger the title, right? It doesn't matter. So I think that is not a good trend because yes, they are extremely smart. Maybe they learn a lot in that year, but what we are missing is the collective learning from the organization. What they could be, all of those 19 years at Biogen, everything that I learned was seeking a challenging, question and developing a concept around it and delivering an enterprise-wide solution rather than somebody, waiting for someone to come and tell me, can you do this, right? I have done it in that sense too. So just allowing yourself the time to grow in a role, I think is very, very important. So that's the downside I see, that everybody is so impatient. And what are managers to do? There are only so many levels in a company. We can't just promote you from a bench scientist to a CEO overnight, right? Then they have to go to another organization. So.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think we all will keep this in mind wherever we join in our future.
I also want to say another thing. I also find that the students these days are very, very resourceful because you're growing up in a, electronically plugged in era. So you're able to connect to many more resources than I ever did as a PhD student or even a postdoctoral fellow. And I really appreciate that because really, resources bring that knowledge and you're able to kind of understand what's going on in your environment and, bring that knowledge back to work. So I think that's another skill set that I've seen in the students who are coming in. So.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Hi, Meena.
Hi.
Hi. So I have like two kind of related questions. So I was curious to know how your typical day looks like. And the second question is like, you must have interviewed a lot of people now. So do you prefer people having a background that you're looking for, or do you consider resumes that are from a different background, or basically what do you look for in a candidate, whether they're just willing to transition, or what kind of behavioral talents you look for, qualities you look for when you're interviewing a candidate?
Sure. So you asked about my day-to-day. Pretty much it is filled with meetings, but they're all purposeful meetings. I never go to one where I don't believe that I'm going to have an impact or I don't have a role to play. In those instances, I tell them, just send me the minutes of the meeting and I'll just read through and understand what the nature of the discussions were. So mostly my days are filled with team meetings. So I have my program meetings, I have the clinical team meetings, I have brand meetings, I have one-on-ones with the team members. I also do a lot of mentoring. So I have a gazillion mentees, honestly, gazillion mentees. And so they all, I meet with them, if not once a month, once a quarter. So I have those meetings. I definitely make time to, take some time off for an exercise here and there. If not every day, I definitely try to do it at least 3 to 4 times a week. So I take some time off during the day to do that. And then reading, catching up on literature, trying to understand what's happening in the space. Those that takes some time. And then many times I'm working also on some enterprise-wide projects. So I meet with my peers or colleagues in trying to advance that particular project, which is not always directly related to my um, direct role, but it's related to my role as an R&D leader. So that's my day. So now coming to interviews and what I look for, right? It all depends on the nature of the role. It's very hard to generalize, and it also is dependent on how much we want to fill the role right away. So the more senior the role is, right, the more we look for somebody who can come in running. So we are not looking to train somebody who's coming in at a senior role. So we expect them to have a breadth of expertise, but it does not have to be specific. For instance, I had a lot of experience in drug development. I had a lot of experience in understanding what it takes to move projects from A to B, but I didn't have any direct experience in gastroenterology. That didn't stop my manager from hiring me, right? Because they were confident that I have the ability to learn and move things forward. So that's a judgment piece that you have to use. It's a filter that you use when you interview people. So I'll contrast that with an entry level role, right? What we're looking for, first of all, a person who is honest, who doesn't really fluff up their CV and their skill set when they speak. Honesty is the best thing because we can look through and find, see through people who are trying to make up things that they never did. So that's the first thing. I look for a person who's also a good communicator, who's confident and who has to communicate, because it's very difficult for me to read minds. So if they cannot tell me why they're looking for this role, then it's very hard for me to hire them. And then the third thing is I am also looking at their ability to learn. Because if you have heard, like many times industry prefers to get people who don't have a whole lot of experience because they can train them the way they want to, them to do things, rather than somebody coming in and saying that I already know how to do this, this is the way I want to do it. Then it becomes a conflict. Okay, so it really depends on, which spectrum or end of the spectrum we are hiring for. So there are all flavors, but what we look for in individuals is showing the commitment to the organization and learning and appreciates the culture of the organization. So I expect them to have done some pre-reading about what the organization is, who the individuals are. I mean, these days with LinkedIn, it doesn't take much time for you to look these people up and see whom am I interviewing with. So I expect my interviewees to ask some intelligent questions, right? Some strategic questions, some interest in their growth. So those are all some of the things. So the person who's interviewing has to demonstrate that interest in the organization.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey today. Let's just talk about you engaging various mentor capabilities. Can you share some of your insights about how a mentee can get the most out of mentor-mentee relationship?
So the way I speak about this to my mentees is they really need to understand what they're looking for, right? They first need to know me as a mentor. Why is it that they choose me to be their mentor, and what do they think I can, help them with? So there has to be some clarity around that relationship. It's not for me to sit across from them and say, so what do you want, right? They have to come in and say, this is what I'm looking to do. Do you see this as my strength? Is this if this is an area that I need to develop, how should I be developing myself? So it takes a bit of preparation from the mentee's end in trying to understand what is it they're looking for from that relationship. It's perfectly fine for you to just have a conversation with a senior leader in an organization. Everything doesn't have to have an ulterior motive, right? But by having that conversation with somebody, you have to derive the benefit of learning something, right? Either you learned about how they maneuver through a particular situation, or how they moved from job A to job B, or how they solved the world's, food crisis. Something you have to learn from that. You don't want to just make small, a conversation and take up their time. So having a motivation to reach out and talk to somebody is important. And it better not be for, give me a job, right? That's not what a mentor is supposed to do. You can talk to them and they can find strengths and they may recommend you. So then they become your sponsor. They may find you to be somebody brilliant and outstanding that they, recommend you for a role in their organization or elsewhere. But that evolves over time. But in those first few meetings that you have to allow the mentor to get to know you. And for that, you have to be quite explicit about what you're looking for in this relationship and, where are you coming from, right? What are your strengths, who you are as a person, who you are as a leader, and everything else that you want to share with them.
Sorry, I was not on the video before. Hi, Meena, very nice
Hi.
and inspiring story. My name is Suprama, and I'm a postdoc in Boston University. And my focus is researching in metabolomics and how the interactomics, basically, how the proteins and metabolites and small molecules interact, and trying to map druggable proteome in host cells for both like infection or other disease morphologies and stuff like that.
Right.
So with that said, I think folks here pretty much asked you everything, and I wanted to know, like, how do you manage your time? Like you have like a multifaceted role even in the at your work, and you dance and so yeah, how is it? Because I want to learn everything. The one trait that Naren knows about me is like trying to learn, like learn new languages, new form of dances. Like I'm trying to do flamenco these days, but it's so hard for me to like take time out. So I always get inspired when I see people like, okay, they do so many things and they can manage the time. So can you can you tell us or give us more insight about that?
Sure. I also want to, let all of you know, all of these skills that I have, it's all grown over the years, right? I did not start off by having the depth and breadth of skills that I have today. So, but I have been purposeful in really devoting my time to what I saw as my priorities. So, this is a word that all of you will be hearing for the rest of your lives, which is learn to prioritize, right? And what is a priority for you today may not be the same 5 years from today, right? So there was a phase in my life when dance and music and science were the only priorities that I had. And then came the family, and then I had a little child, and then I had, other responsibilities. So priorities change. Similarly, even at work, right? I started off being an individual contributor. So I was more focused on my science and my contributions and how do I get my name out there. And as I became a leader in the organization, I was more and more concerned about my people. How do I develop them? How do I get them newer opportunities? So those are the priorities. So when you think about all of the various things that you want to do, right? Make a list of what is the most important thing that you have to get done now versus some things that you can do probably later in the day, later in the month, later in your life. And because the reason is, for anything, you have to expend a considerable amount of time to become an expert. So you cannot have 20 balls up in the air and expect to catch all of them, right? So you have to be strategic in only having 5 or 6, depending on your juggling skills, and be able to catch all of them. And it can be just 2, right? So don't look at yourself against anybody, but challenge your own self, right? What is my capacity to take on 2 different things, 3 different things, and can I keep it going? That's how I look at it. I never compare myself to somebody else who is much more accomplished. You can admire them, but you don't want to say, how come I am not like that person? You know what? That's quite fine. Focus on what you can accomplish and become an expert at it. Because by taking on too many things, you will not be an expert in anything. That's one thing. The second thing is you also have to be bold in stating what you are prioritizing, right? So for instance, I actually would go into my team meetings and tell them, hey guys, I am not going to attend this meeting today. I'm going to, ask you, I'll ask a deputy or my, co-leader to say, you're going to chair the meeting and then you're just going to bring this information for me. I'm going to take myself out of this meeting. Similarly, I'll go to my manager and say, I have to leave today at 2 o'clock. I know we have a deadline. I will make sure that I get it done, but I cannot stay, at work until this is done. So by being very open about it and sharing what your priorities are, like I would never miss something, if there was a show that my daughter was putting up, I would say, I have to go for it. If there was something else that I was doing, I'd say, I have to go for that, but I'll make sure that I deliver. And, there are going to be some late nights, there's going to be some multitasking that has to happen, but it cannot become a permanent state. Because if you have to do 20 things every single day, you cannot do it. And there aren't that many people who do it that way. The people who actually succeed are the ones who are very good at prioritization, right? So keep that in mind. And prioritization changes all the time. It's not the same thing every day. So that's my quick, it may not be a prescriptive answer, but there is no prescription to this. I just want to, I'm being very honest about it. You just have to, be smart about how you, do this.
Hi, Meena. I have one quick question. My name is Sharda, and thank you so much for your time and your very valuable insights. I'm a PhD with a molecular and cell biology background in oncology. I worked on lung cancer, and for the past year and a half, I've been doing medical writing in the field of oncology. So my question to you was about the one point that you referred previously, where you were saying you set up some time to learn about things that you want to get into. So I'm trying to get into a particular role in the industry for which I'm learning and I'm doing my best that I can do, but I keep coming up with this block of not having the experience of having done that. And what would your advice be in a case like this?
So this is where networking is very, very important, Sharda. What you need to do is either you cold write to people on LinkedIn and say, can I have a coffee with you? Can I have a chat with you? I just want to learn about what you do, the role you play, and try to build those sorts of connections. And the more connections you build, network in that same area, suddenly one day, right, those individuals come to you and say, hey, listen, there's an opening in my group. Are you interested? I've seen this happen. It's not that I'm just making this up. I have seen this happen to a number of people. So I'm actually president of an organization called WEST, which is Women in the Enterprise of Science and Technology. And really, the main purpose of their organization is beyond enabling women to develop leadership skills. We actually encourage them to build their professional networks. Because what we see deficient in women is because of all the responsibilities that they shoulder, they never ever make the time to form these connections, purposeful connections. It's not just, linking up with people willy-nilly, purposeful connections. And that's what I mean. So if you're interested in a specific area, scan through LinkedIn to see who are all those people in that area. Cold write them and say, hey, I'm very impressed by your background. I'd like to learn a little more. Can you spare 30 minutes? I'll buy you a coffee. If it's a local person, tell them I'll get you a coffee. Do you want to come and spend some time with me or chat with them on Zoom? That's how it's going to happen. Unfortunately, depending on what area that is, some of them do expect, as I said, the more senior the role is, they do want you to come in with that experience. So you may have to, step down or go through a training program to get that experience before you are able to secure that role.
That is great. That makes sense. Thank you so much.
I think Tanisha has said something on chat. My name is Tanishka. I'm a PhD student studying serotonin receptors in Fragile X syndrome and the leading monogenic cause of intellectual disability and autism. Would you recommend doing an academic postdoc before joining industry? I'm looking to stay in neurological disorders.
So it's actually a personal choice. So there is no, rhyme or reason why you think you would have to do an academic postdoc. You could also do an industry postdoc, right? The way I always view postdoctoral fellowships is you want to get training outside of an area you're already an expert in. So you don't want to, extend your training after the 5-6 years of PhD in that same area in a postdoctoral fellowship. It makes, at least for me, it makes no sense. You have to be going into a different area to expand your horizons. And if that is not your intent, that you love to stay in the area that you have trained in, then you should go straight for an academic postdoc or you should go for a job. You shouldn't be postdocing.
So I know, like previously you said that industry usually hires like people with a breadth of knowledge, and like coming from a neuropharmacology lab, I feel like we focus more on the depth of a particular topic and not really the breadth.
So that's why I was asking if like a postdoctoral training in some other area, say like Parkinson's or something, would help.
I would say if you're going into a different area, it will definitely enhance your CV, but you need to keep your eyes open, right? Constantly scan, what the opportunities available are. There is no harm in being an expert, particularly as a starting, a person in an industry job. That's the expertise that they're looking for, and then you'll pick up other learnings through your experience in the industry. So what I said is it's always good to have expansive knowledge, but that is not in exchange for having in-depth knowledge in an area. So if you're able to find a job description and in a company that interests you and this is tailor-made for you, you should apply for it and then plan to learn on the job other skills. So it's not formulaic. So keep an open mind and always search for things that appeal to you, right? But if you're having difficulty after searching for 6 months, 1 year, there is nobody who's willing to take you on, then you know that there is something else that's missing, and that's one thing you can do. There may be some people willing to say, you can ask them, was there a reason that you did not hire? Where there's some areas where I can get myself trained better, so I would be a stronger candidate in the future, and then you can focus on that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Right. The other thing is, for all of you who are in PhD roles or in postdoctoral roles, look at your peers in the lab. See where they are going, and they are your best professional network, right? They always have loyalty to their PIs. They have loyalty to their lab. So they'll be very willing to talk to you and also open doors for you. So don't miss out on that resource.
Okay. Carrying none. So, Meena, so a few questions. Actually, I had a ton of questions related to your dance and everything. Maybe I'll ask it through the context of these 10 questions. We do want you to go back to your dog. What's your dog's name?
Linus.
Linus.
Yes.
Cute. All right. Well, that was not one of the 10 questions. Okay. If you had a superpower, if you were given a superpower, what would you want what skill would you want to learn instantaneously?
Oh, it's a skill.
Like something, some power that you would have had.
Okay, to anticipate what the future would look like. I would love to have that superpower.
Okay.
And my inspiration for that is Steve Jobs. I have to say that honestly. It looks like he anticipated how much we'd enjoy the iPhone, right? And he created it. At least that's what I read from his book.
Okay, yeah. Cool. You've worked on many drugs, Tysabri and the recent Alzheimer's one. Outside the ones that you worked on, which drug do you feel like is an important drug that has been developed in the last, let's say, 2-3 years?
I would say even though I worked on it, but I do have to say that drugs that address pediatric, genetic disorders is something that I feel very tied to. So the SMA drug that I worked on, nusinersen, I'm very proud of that.
Cool. You mentioned that you'd like to read books. Two questions in that. What book are you reading right now? And what book are you writing or going to write about?
Okay, so I'm reading a book called The First Cell. Don't ask me the author's name. It's really a very, very good book. I would recommend everybody to, get it and read it. If I were to write something, I'm going to write about experiences of women in the pharma industry. There's a lot of conversations around what's holding women back and maybe some strategies for how we can think about our own careers in the industry.
And this was sort of my question that I wanted to ask you about your dance. How has your dance helped you in your career?
2 ways. One is, I think many ways, but I'll tell you 2 things. One is discipline. So I'm not a procrastinator because that's the rigor we had in dance. You couldn't postpone your rehearsals. You had to be in ship shape all the time. So that's one, discipline. And the second thing is expansive ability to remember things, right? Because there's a lot of sequence of things that you have to remember in dance and in music and in that imagination, that innovation, right? So you choreograph on the go. So those components have helped me a lot in how I apply and think about science.
What do you do when you have a bad day?
Take several deep breaths and move on. I'll just tell myself it's a moment. Things have to be only better. I look at bad days as just a bottoming out, and there's only one way to look, that is up.
Nice. Something that people don't know about you?
I have a sweet tooth. I could use sweets for every meal of the day.
What would we find you doing on the weekend?
You will find me going for long walks. That's become my favorite thing to do in the pandemic. I'll be gardening, I'll be doing yoga, and I'll be cooking. I love cooking and eating, so I do that.
You mentioned Steve Jobs, but who either historical figure or current figure would you like to meet?
Whom would I like to meet? That's a very good question. I'll take some. There are too many people on the list, so I'm trying to winnow it down.
Yeah.
Maybe Jacinda, the Prime Minister of New Zealand.
Oh.
So only one who seems to have thought through everything strategically and managed to hold her country together. I do want to talk to her about, how she thinks about approaching problems.
And then the last question, is sort of general advice for all of us here. What challenges in your career have you faced that you say, okay, other people shouldn't face this?
Other people shouldn't face this.
You went through some challenge, and then you overcame that challenge, and what did you learn from that? And maybe.
Right. So the challenge I faced was, when I became a leader, at the end of it all, I had 120 people in my group. So it is a very diverse group, very different personalities, things that I did not even know existed within the human psyche, right? And then you have the HR group that is constantly monitoring how managers are dealing with problems. So I have been blindsided by some challenges that my employees have had, which was related to either, not taking women employees seriously in their group, or just having a brawl in the bar, beating up each other. I mean, you name it, I've had it. And those things have taken me by surprise, because this was not inherent in my upbringing. I was not used to even witnessing any of those, leave alone learn how to manage it or report it to HR directly. It was a tough learning for me, but I learned my lessons. So I would say it's not that I don't wish others should not face it, but I hope that people are better equipped to face it. So I think our whole HR group learned a lot of lessons through these experiences as well. I mean, I've had a female employee whose husband showed up with a gun at the workplace. So these are situations where you have to figure out what you do to help that employee. You can't distance yourself. It's like what's happening, in India. I mean, how does a company react when they have so many employees of Indian origin, or when you have East Asians getting shot at or beaten up in the New York subway station, right? How does, a CEO of a company or a head of R&D respond to that? It's very important, because you realize people are watching. They're looking at what you're posting on LinkedIn. What are you saying about this? What is your empathetic, note to your employees? So those are things that you learn. I think that's where I think every day as leaders, we're learning to do better. And we are learning from each other, what our peers are doing. Yeah. So if you see Pfizer come up with a note tomorrow, you'll see Takeda saying the same thing, and then Biotech says it, Amgen says it. So it's interesting, the industry trend, right? Like Black Lives Matter, then you see everybody saying it, so.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm going to ask you to do something a little unusual. Can you say a Mridangam bowl for us in Aditala, let's say?
I can just say tadin dinna takadin dinna takida dinna takadin dinna takajanatam 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 takajanate.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. So, Meena,
that is so Naren.
Thank you so much, Meena. I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to ask everybody else to wait for a few minutes because I just want to get quick feedback from them from this hour of conversation with you. Thank you again so much. I'll get back to you tomorrow and I'll talk to you later.
It's been a pleasure, guys. Thanks for spending your time with me, and also thanks for inviting me. And good luck to everybody. Okay, there is a tomorrow, so don't feel gloom and doom at any time.
And guys, don't forget, this
Thank
is an amazing networking opportunity. She is a great mentor. Connect with her on LinkedIn, and I'm sure she'll help every one of you.
A network should last a lifetime. Let us help you create lasting professional relationships with our world-class mentors through the Biopatrika Industry Mentorship Program. A strategic guidance program unlike no other, full of expert interviews, industry internship opportunities, CV writing, inflection point analysis, life maps, and of course, the gateway to your dream career. For a limited time only, all our services are freely available for you as we truly want you to succeed.